employment. We'd also like to thank our sponsor for today's webinar, CHS. CHS is a supporting company of the AgCareers.com Ag Warriors program, and as a top employer and a top employer in the ag industry, they have made it possible for us to provide you this valuable webinar at no cost today. For those of you who are joining us who are veterans or active military, we also would like to thank you for your service. My name is Ashley Collins, and I'm the Education and Marketing Manager with AgCareers.com. I will be serving as our moderator for today's webinar. During this webinar, our presenter will provide you with tips on how to effectively articulate your military experience into workplace skills that are valued by potential employers, as well as tips for translating your rank and duties during service on your resume, along with some other helpful information. We are pleased to have Lisa Rosser, who is founder of the Value of a Veteran program, as our presenter today. I will turn things over to Lisa momentarily, but first I would like to briefly review a few housekeeping items. Your lines are muted to help with the timing and the flow of today's presentation. At the end of the presentation, we will take time to answer questions, and we'll do that using the hand-raising function and/or the chat area of the GoToMeeting panel to help us avoid cluttered conversation. If you have an immediate question that you would like addressed during today's presentation, I ask that you use the chat or the question box that is part of your GoToMeeting panel. We will monitor those questions closely, and if it's not answered immediately, we should address them shortly within the presentation. During the presentation, the slides will move automatically as Lisa shares her content. You may experience a slight delay in the progression of the slides based on your internet connection. You'll also want to give your mouse a shake every once in a while to keep your computer from going into sleep mode. If for any reason you have to shut down or have any problems, you may rejoin the workshop. You'll just need to follow the same process as you did before to get started. And finally, after today's webinar, you will receive an electronic evaluation form. If you could provide us with your feedback, it would be greatly appreciated and useful as we plan for future webinars and other supporting services as part of our AgCareers.com Ag Warriors program. If you're not familiar with Ag Warriors, it is an effort by AgCareers.com to connect military men and women to companies and careers within the agricultural industry. For more information, click on the Ag Warriors icon on the AgCareers.com website to view a listing of the supporting companies and additional information. That should be all of our housekeeping items. Now please allow me to formally introduce Lisa Rosser, our presenter today. Lisa is a 16-year human resources professional and military veteran who spent 22 years in the active Army and the Army Reserve. In 2007, she combined these backgrounds and founded a training and consulting firm called The Value of a Veteran. She has made it her mission to help companies understand what military veterans have to offer an organization, how to translate military skills into civilian positions, and how to market and to source military talent. With that, Lisa, I will turn things over to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ashley. So today's session is less of a technical review on how to actually write the resume and goes more into the steps you should be taking prior to you even deciding that you want to format that very first resume. Because we need to help you get very clear on what it is that you have to offer employers, what skills you have, and then how do you communicate those skills in a language that civilians will understand more clearly. Once you can identify those skills and identify the proper terminology to use and the best way to phrase it, then you can take that information and begin to build out the resumes. So we're going to start today with, step one, which is not write your resume, but is actually take that step back and let's document what is your master list of skills. And I should have asked this in the beginning, but Ashley, have they been given a copy of the presentation and the two handouts already?
Yes, those were emailed out this morning, and then we'll also attach those following today when they get their webinar evaluation.
Okay, perfect. So for those of you that have already received the handouts and the two supporting documents, the second supporting document that says how to create your master skills list, this presentation is basically built upon that. So if you have it open and want to follow along with it, that will help you out as well. But again, the master skills list is what you need to begin to do your research on so that when the time comes that you're ready to begin building a resume, you can start pulling from that master skills list in order to build a resume that is customized for the position that you're trying to apply to. One of the challenges that we see so many times with military resumes, and again, it's no fault of your own because you're not generally used to writing resumes when you're in the military. We don't obviously use the resumes. We don't apply for jobs or interview for jobs in the military. But we tend to kind of just take everything we've ever done in the military and try to drop that into one document and hope that it makes sense to someone on the civilian side who's looking at our resumes for job opportunities. And it does not. It makes no sense to the people on the other side who don't have any military experience, who don't understand why there's information on the resume that is irrelevant, that has nothing to do with the position that's being applied for, that is still has a little too much jargon, a little too much terminology that's military specific, and they can't make sense of it. So that's why we have this session today, to help you understand how to build out that master skills list and translate it at that point, so that way when you're ready to write the resume, it makes more sense. So first, how do we identify what are your master skills? Whether you've been in the military for 4 years, 14 years, or 24 years, you've been building a lot of skills along the way. Some things are things that the military taught you through your occupation, whatever your occupation happens to be. And then there are what we call applied skills. The skills that you learn by doing work, the nature of the work that you do and how we do work in the military. You learn a lot of applied skills as well. And as I'll mention towards the end of the presentation, that's actually some of the most valuable skills that you can bring to an employer are those applied skills. So let's start first with some of the more occupationally related skills. So how do you determine what it is that you're actually good at? So go back through some of your performance reviews. If you are senior enough in the military that you have actually received a performance review. In the Army, we call them OERs and NCOERs. Your service probably calls it something different, but I think you know what I'm talking about, right? The annual review that you get that indicates what your strengths are. You know, here's where you've excelled. Here's the things that you're particularly good at. So make a note of whatever those skills happen to be. Even if you're not interested in pursuing a job necessarily that utilizes that skill, it's still important to document the fact that you have it, that you've had training in it, you've performed in that particular skill, you do have some aptitude for that skill, because you never know when that's going to come in handy somewhere down the line. So go ahead and document it even if you're not overly excited about that particular skill. So that's step one. You know, go through your old performance reviews if you have them. If you're more junior than that or you need additional insights, then go out to your particular service's recruiting website. So for the Army, it was goarmy.com. Your service is listed here, and they're hyperlinked, so you can go back to the presentation and take a look at that. I have there a screenshot of the Army's careers website, and we're going to reference that again as we go through this presentation. Go through your awards, citations. If you were ever, you know, Sailor of the Year or any of these other types of awards and accolades, go through that and see what it was that people were saying, you know, was so, you know, what were your strengths? What were you known for? Why did you get this award? Because there's a reason you got it. And so what is that particular skill or aptitude that you had? And just make that list. And so whether that list ends up saying things like, you know, okay, I'm good at training other people, I'm good at operations, I'm good at doing analytics, I've got good computer skills, you know, whatever they are. Again, that should be a fairly robust list of things that you have learned how to do. So start with that list. So now, how do we begin to come up with what are some of the specifics underneath that skill? What are things that you're able and capable of doing or have experience having done? And then how do we make sure that when we're describing that in a resume or in a job interview that we're using civilian language to describe that particular skill set? So I'm going to go back to that Army page that I brought up before, and we're going to use the MOS example, Military Occupational Specialty for the Army. Patriot Fire Control Enhanced Operator Maintainer. That's the 14 Echo. Again, use your service-specific example here. But you should be familiar with, because hopefully they've taught you this during the Transition Assistance class if you've been through one, that there's a website called ONET. ONET is the Occupational Handbook Online. This is a free website that anybody can go use, not just military people, civilians can use it too. But what it does is it lists, basically it's like a directory of every occupation you could think of, and what are the knowledge, skills, and abilities someone should have in order to perform successfully in that occupation. What is the type of training that that person would have had? What are some licenses or certifications that they should have? What are some tasks that they should be able to perform? So one of the things that ONET happens to also have as one of its features is a military to civilian crosswalk. So you can go in there, and I provide you the link at the bottom, onetonline.org/crosswalk, where you can type in your specific military occupational code, and it will come back and say, here are some civilian positions that are related to your occupation based on the tasks and knowledge and skills and abilities that that occupation requires. So if I were to type in that 14 Echo that you see there, and it's an Army MOS, it comes back and says, okay, yes, that's a Patriot Fire Controlled Enhanced Operator Maintainer, and here are 7 civilian occupations that utilize some of the same skill set that you utilized as that 14 Echo. So it's not a neat one-for-one, oh, if you did this in the military, then this is the one thing that you do or can do in the civilian life. It's obviously it's a combat arms occupation because it deals with artillery, but it is complicated enough that there's a lot of different things that go into being that 14 Echo. And that's what it's trying to tell you here, is it's a little bit of everything. It's a little bit of surveying and using mapping techniques. It's a little bit of moving large, heavy equipment, and that's why you get the construction equipment operator. If you're an E5 or above, or E4, depending on your service, you were probably supervising people that were doing this type of work. You do a lot of electronics. You utilize electronics. You do a lot of repair of electronics. And, of course, then you know munitions and how to the strategy behind using artillery, the tactics behind using artillery, you know that as well. So that's what ONET is trying to tell you, is all 7 of these different civilian occupations have pieces and parts that make up what you did as an enlisted member in the Army. So I picked one. I said, okay, well, one that I think, obviously would translate across civilian occupations. So we picked electrical and electronics repairs for commercial and industrial equipment, because that is one part of what you did as a 14 Echo. So ONET gives you this summary report, and I've only taken a screenshot of just part of the report. It's fairly long. So I would look at that, and I would say, okay, in a nutshell, what does an electronics repairer do? That first sentence explains it all. You repair, test, adjust, or install electronic equipment. Some alternate job titles might be. So these are some things that you might want to pay attention to because these are potential job titles you might want to search on if you were actually actively looking for work and trying to figure out, well, what types of jobs should I look at? If you're not actively in the job hunt yet, that's okay. Still, make a note of these off to the side. But these are job titles that civilians would recognize. They're not going to recognize 14 Echo, but they're going to recognize electronics technician or electrical and instrument technician, things like that. So then again, you would search through this report. So the little hyperlinks you see there, tasks, tools, technology, knowledge, skills, abilities, that's everything that's in the report. We're just looking at the tasks hyperlink right now. So here are some really basic tasks that someone who would be an electronics repair person probably already knows how to do or has been trained how to do, has had experience doing. So that's where you're going to start writing down what the tasks are that you've performed. You know how to do tests on faulty equipment and diagnosing malfunctions. So make a note of that. So your skill is you're an electronics repairer. The tasks you know how to perform, you've been trained in and that you have experience in, whatever those tasks might be. And so here they're just giving you about a dozen or so potential options on that. You might want to take a look at some of the other options as well. But so these are items that eventually you could put into a resume if you were going to be applying specifically to a job that is looking for someone with electronics repair skills. So moving on then, I give an example here of, I just picked 3 of the skills that a 14 Echo, which very strongly have coming out of the military. So that electronics repair, heavy equipment operation, because obviously you're driving that HEMTT around with all the missiles on the back. That's heavy equipment. It's not a bulldozer. It's not a dump truck, but clearly it's bigger than a taxi cab. So heavy equipment operation. And then also you've worked tremendously with guided systems control. So I would look each one of those things up, and I would list, just little bullet points of specifically what you are capable of doing. So under electronics repair, again, I mentioned, you're used to using schematics and manuals to do inspections and repair. You're used to testing faulty equipment. You know how to inspect that equipment. For heavy equipment operation, clearly you can do basic maintenance on a heavy piece of equipment that has hydraulic systems, diesel engines, things like that. So you want to make notes of all of those kind of things. And with the guided systems, control, you know how to navigate using GPS, because that's what you were doing with the missile system. So keep making those notes. I just list a couple of them here, and continue to go down that particular roster. And you're going to continue to build on this list so that you can have ultimately the language that you need to have once you put it onto a resume. So now, once you've built out kind of that initial list of skills and some of those initial bullet points, now it's time to start Googling or Binging or whatever particular website that you use. So I started first with GPS guidance systems. So I went out to a web browser and I just typed in GPS guidance systems just to see what kind of jobs would pop up, or what other kind of terminology or other links that would give me some ideas as to what civilians care about when it comes to GPS guidance systems. And one of the first things that came up, and it's particularly interesting since we're on the Ag Careers webinar here, is these images that you see here. And it turns out that within farming and agriculture, there's a tremendous amount of interest for using GPS guidance systems to help them do farming. So I thought, okay, well, isn't that interesting? Who would have thought that you would have had GPS systems on tractors? And maybe you didn't know that and you had no idea. So I would, at this point, start researching, what companies manufacture that equipment, or what companies sell that type of equipment, because that's going to clue me in as to what kind of jobs potentially I could qualify for, because I have experience utilizing GPS guidance systems. So one of the job announcements that I found as I was continuing to do my research was this one here for a company called Ag Leader Technology. They're based in Ames, Iowa. And they do a lot of this type of precision farming electronics with GPS systems. So this job in particular was as a technical support representative. So in order to be successful in that position, you have to know how the equipment works. So you've already worked with GPS systems. You've just been using it in artillery. But you have familiarity with GPS systems, so that you would not be a stranger to how these things work. Can you troubleshoot equipment like that? Well, of course you can. You've been doing it on the radar systems and on the launching systems. Can you give a presentation on it? Could you explain to someone who's never used equipment like this how to use equipment? Well, if you've been in the military long enough, you've trained the junior people. So yeah, you can do stuff like that. Can you do testing of it? You probably have already done that in your lifestyle. So as you're looking at this, job announcement again, maybe you're not ready to apply for a job. You're, still a year out. Or maybe this isn't exactly, potentially what you would be interested in doing. But now you have some civilian language. So you have also done these things. So you want to cut and paste and take some of this language out and put it back on that master skills list. Okay, I do know how to troubleshoot precision guided hardware and software, even if it's not specifically farming that you're interested in. You are capable of giving a presentation on how the equipment works. So you want to put that on your master skills list. You are able to troubleshoot or assist someone with training on this type of equipment because you've done that before. Put that on your master list. And again, now you have in the back of your mind, I could potentially go after jobs as some kind of a technical support representative for the technology itself, or people who maybe do repairs of this type of equipment or sales of this type of equipment, what have you. So keep that in, on the back of your list, saying, here are some jobs that might be appropriate for me when I start to look for jobs of these types. So my next search term that I picked up on was technician and hydraulic, because again, now if we're still looking at being kind of more on the mechanical usage of this equipment or the repair of this type of equipment, we want to pick different things. So technician is a good term for someone who actually can repair, can troubleshoot, repair, install equipment. So technician is always a good one to search on. And then I just picked hydraulic equipment. So then this job came up. Okay, well, this is for a company based in Virginia called Trex. They actually make decks. So rather than having a hardwood deck, you might have a deck made out of this specific, it's fabricated material. And so what they're looking for at Trex is not someone to sell necessarily the prefabricated deck materials, although I'm sure they have jobs like that. They're looking for an electrical maintenance technician for their manufacturing facility, because they actually manufacture this equipment or this product. So they need someone, as I'm looking through the description here, who can read and understand electrical schematics, online drawings, and CAD drawings. Well, you know how to do that because that's what you were doing as a 14 Echo. Can you troubleshoot diagrams? And now you start to see some of their industry lingo and jargon coming in here. So you're going to have to do some research. And you'll see this a lot. What is a PLC terminal? Well, programming logic command, I think is what it is. I'd have to look it up again. But I saw that continuously in a lot of these types of jobs. So, okay, so that's a term that gets used a lot in the civilian space. And so if that's, if that is something that you have a skill in, then that's something that you're going to want to write down on that master skill list, because that's a term that civilians will recognize. So, rather than saying I can troubleshoot a Patriot system where nobody necessarily knows what a Patriot system is, I can do troubleshooting of whatever it says here, ladder diagrams and stuff like that. You've got experience doing that. Put that on your master skills list. You know how to use all those types of equipment. It says mega ohm meters, loop calibrators. If you in fact do know how to use that equipment, then put that on your master skills list. You're also going to pick up, as you look at these different job descriptions, again, even if you're not necessarily looking for a job right now, or that job doesn't necessarily sound particularly interesting to you, just keep writing stuff down, because you're going to start to pick up, maybe you'll see things on here around licenses and certifications. Maybe it's not a required part of the job, but it's highly desired, or preference given if you have these types of licenses and certifications. Make a note of that, because again, especially if you have a little bit of time, you might want to investigate some of those licenses or certifications and say, is this something that I would be interested in pursuing on my own? Can I use tuition assistance? Can I use the COOL programs, the Army COOL or the Navy COOL programs to get that certification? Can I use my GI Bill to go get that certification? So again, at least now you know what might be helpful to you and what might set you aside from other people trying to apply for these jobs. So again, keep making notes here and keep building that master skills list. We haven't even started writing a resume yet. We're just trying to build out the master skills list. And then the last skill I picked out was the instrumentation controls technician. And so this one, you'll see a lot of evidence that energy companies, so Southern Company, Exelon, Marathon Petroleum, whether it's oil and gas, nuclear energy, or other types of energy companies, they're hot to hire people who have worked with instrumentation controls, can identify, can troubleshoot, can teach other people how to use this type of equipment. And again, you have experience in that if you were that 14 Echo, because you were also doing that as part of the Patriot system. So again, start picking out some words out of this thing that you would want to add to that master skills list, and just keep building and building upon that. So that was just 3 examples of skills that you were able to pull out of your background as, for example, that 14 Echo, the Patriot systems technician. I also mentioned that there were applied skills that are highly sought after by employers. So applied skills, again, are not skills that you necessarily get taught directly in your occupation. It's what you learn just by doing your job in the military. So things like critical thinking and problem solving, that's how the military operates. You have a mission to accomplish, no excuses. You're never going to have all the resources you need, all the time you need, all the people and the equipment that you need, but you still have to you still have to accomplish the mission. So you utilize critical thinking and problem solving to figure out how you're going to still accomplish the mission even though you don't have all the resources that you need. So you want to make sure that in your resume you also make mention of the fact that these are skills that you have, and if you can pull out some relevant examples, because this master skills list is not only going to help you with writing the resume, it's going to help you with the interview ultimately, because people are going to ask you, well, give me an example of critical thinking, or give me an example of your problem-solving skills. When did you encounter a situation where you didn't have all the resources you needed, but you still had a mission to accomplish? How did you do that? Then that's when you're going to pull back. It's like, well, I was able to use critical thinking and problem solving to ultimately accomplish the mission, and here's how I did it. And then you'll have those examples top of mind because you've gone through the exercise of writing down your master skills list. So again, all of these things that you see listed here, top 10 things that are sought by employers, well, guess what? The military taught you all of that anyway. Whether you were in 4 years, 14 years, or 24 years, you have had some level of experience doing that. And the longer you've been in, the more that you should really be honing this and including it as part of your resume. So now that you have taken the time to build that master skills list, and this is not something that you do just one time and then put it on a shelf, or you do it one time, you create one resume, congratulations, maybe you got a job out of doing that, and then you throw it away. With civilian economy today, it's not like a career. It's not like you're going to get into a job and you're going to stay in that job for 20 years. Chances are you're going to move around a few times during the next 20 years. So keep that master skills list on hand and continue to add to it. Even as you have a civilian job and you now get to use it in a different way, you still want to continue to build on it. Your industry is going to change. It's going to go through an evolution. Maybe different skills are going to be needed, more digital skills or what have you. So it never hurts to keep this list somewhere on your computer and continue to add to it. Maybe annually revisit it and continue to add to it. Because when the time comes that you're going to need to write another resume and apply for another job, you won't be starting from scratch. You'll be able to build upon it based on that. But now that you've taken the time to build out the master skills list, you've identified some of the civilian language based on what you saw in different job descriptions, now you can start writing a more customized resume for the jobs. So there's different types of resumes that you can put together. There's what I call the general resume. So for example, again, don't lump everything you've ever done in the military into one resume and put that out there into the ether, because nobody's going to pick up on it. You want to have some general resumes. By general, I mean, focus on a target skill set. So maybe you were going to look at that electronics repair as one resume. So you want to just pull out the skills that show that you know how to do that kind of work. Maybe you want to have a second resume that focuses on your ability to train people on how to do that type of repair or that type of inspection or utilize that kind of equipment. So maybe that's a second resume, in which case you're going to pull out just the relevant skills that would go with a trainer kind of resume. And then maybe there was one around utilization of the GPS equipment, and so that might be your third resume. So again, those are general resumes that you're going to write that says, I know how to do this kind of work in general, and I am seeking positions that will utilize that skill set. When it comes time to apply to a specific position, so let's say you were interested in positions with Exelon, one of the energy companies, with their instrument and controls. Well, now you're going to dust off that instrument and controls resume that you had created, and you're going to take a look at the specific job description that Exelon has put forth, and you're going to look at what criteria they have. What skills do they look for? What tasks do you need to be able to perform? What licenses and certifications are they seeking? And you're going to customize then your general resume to mirror the language in the Exelon job description. So for example, if they say that you're an instrument and controls technician, and you didn't call yourself that, you said you were something else, but the job is basically the same, then when you write your resume for that position, you call yourself an instrument and controls technician, because that's what they call it and that's what they're looking for. It just makes your resume easier for them to find as you put it through. So with that, I wanted to leave plenty of time for questions because I know that there will be a lot of questions out there. So with that, Ashley, I'll turn it back over to you so that you can start to ask me the questions that have been submitted.
Sure. Okay. Wonderful. Well, I don't have any questions that have come in as of yet. What we will do is if you have a question, you have two options. There is a hand icon on your GoToMeeting panel. If you press that, it will alert me on my end, and I will then unmute your line so that you can ask Lisa your question. Give me a second to get your line unmuted, and I'll call on you from that standpoint. If you would rather type your question in, I am monitoring that as well, and we'll look for questions to come in via text, and we'll ask those. So I'm just going to give it a minute here to see if I see any hands come up or questions come in.
One question that might be appropriate for us to ask you all is where are you right now with your job hunt? Are you still in the military and looking, just sort of preparing yourself now and you've still got some time before you leave? Or are you already out of the military and you're actively seeking work? Or maybe you're a student right now and you're preparing for the fact that eventually once you complete your studies you are going to have to look for a job. So maybe you could type that into the question panel and just kind of let us know who's out there in the audience, and then Ashley, you can let me know what the responses are.
Sure, yeah. And we also have some employers, I believe, on the line. And also we have a couple of different colleges and universities who have joined us as well. I'm sure from a college-university perspective there's some interest on how to help some of the students who are there at the university or college who may be former military. And then from a company standpoint, I'm sure we have some employers who are seeking to connect with veterans that are coming into the to their workforce, hopefully.
Yep, so the process is very similar for the employers and the College Career Center folks, is going through that process with the service member. For the career side, you can help them begin to craft the resumes. For the employers, if you're getting a resume that reads in military-ese, that has a lot of jargon and acronyms and job titles that don't make any sense to you, that's where you have to be willing to do a little bit of that research to try and understand, what does an infantryman do? What does an artillery or a tanker, an armor person do? Or what does a psychological operations specialist do? Because if you just sort of take it at face value, it doesn't sound like it would have any application. But once you dive into what are the skills that go into performing that job well in the military, it's the skills that will jump out at you and say, oh, wait a minute, but I need someone with a good operations background, so I am excited about these combat arms guys. Or I am excited to know that there's someone out there that knows how to craft messages that influence audiences to take actions, which is what a psychological operations specialist does. We would call that something else on the civilian side. But they have that skill set. They've been applying that knowledge. They've just been using it in a different industry, in a different context.
We have one person who has shared that they are currently serving in the National Guard as a 92Y, and I'm sure, Lisa, you know what that means. Currently enrolled in school and looking for employment.
Okay.
And we've also had a question come in. The question is from David, and he asked, is it significant, the lapse of time between the date of retirement and your next job?
It's only significant if you don't explain that, that, yes, I acknowledge there's a lapse of time and here's what I was doing during that time frame, because there are still plenty of recruiters and employers out there who will look at, your job history. And if there are gaps in there, it's not unusual necessarily, especially not since 2008 when the economy imploded. It's not unusual for people to have gaps in their experience, but generally people will say what they were doing, or I was downsized, I was laid off from a job, and was job hunting actively, or I was in school during that time frame, or I was taking care of my family during that time frame. So as long as you can basically explain what that gap is, then generally they don't have an issue with it. It's just when you leave off, gee, there's a 2-year gap here and a 3-year gap over here, and there's no explanation, then that kind of makes people go, and then they spend more time worrying about what you were doing than they do trying to figure out what your skills are.
And to add to that, that's in a cover letter opportunity, because you're often, the way from an employer standpoint, your resume goes out there, and resumes are a little bit more concise. You don't have that opportunity to give that large of an explanation, and sometimes you don't have the opportunity to have that actual verbal connection and to tell that to an employer. So utilizing that space in your cover letter to provide that explanation. We have had another comment come in here sharing with us where they are in their military career and job search process. Retired and doing 1099 work in my military field, and became a partner in an ID theft prevention group. Has also had a few interviews with Fortune 100 and for GS jobs.
Okay. So I'm wondering if your background might have been in maybe military police work or other kind of investigations or analysis kind of work. So I can build off of that, and I'll build off the 92 Yankee one here in a moment as well. So yeah, we've had these types of questions come through before, where someone, let's say for example, was a military police person, and so they're like, well, I don't want to be a policeman. And it's like, okay, well, but what skills did the military teach you as part of being a policeman? Well, you can do investigative work. You can analyze data. If you went through basically the same exercise I just walked you through, you'll pull out that you have a lot of really concrete, valuable skills that can get leveraged in different ways. So we found out that with a lot of our military police people, they can go into fraud investigations for insurance companies or for banks, because both of them would utilize that type of skill set. And it turns out that those groups love people with the military police background, because they know you've already done very similar type of work. So it doesn't have to be, well, I was a policeman, I guess I'm going to go look for a policeman's job. You can leverage the skills in a different way. You can also work in emergency management. There's a lot of companies and state governments and local governments that are looking for people who have experience with responding to emergencies, which anyone in combat arms and like military police and other occupations, you have a lot of experience in how do you prepare for disasters or crises, how do you respond to crises, how do you evaluate whether your organization is vulnerable to those types of situations. Well, guess what? Companies have to go through that exercise as well. The safety and security of their buildings, the safety and security of their data, the safety and security of the people who work in there. So you can leverage that skill set in a different way for corporations and state and local governments as well. So with the 92 Yankee, you're going to have to remind me, is that supply or petroleum? I can't remember. If you would type that in, and then I can build it off of that.
Supply.
Supply. Okay. So again, so you were working in supply, logistics, in the military. So you go through basically that same exercise. So what are some of the skills that you're going to learn as a supply clerk? Well, number one, customer service, because you have to deal directly with other military people coming and asking you for supplies. You can put customer service down. You have to be able to do inventory and assessments of stockage levels. So when you look up that type of job, it will generally, if you use ONET, it'll come back and say logistician. So you look at the different skill sets, and it talks about that. How do you do inventory and control? How do you do this different supply chain type of work? And as you're thinking about, well, what do I want to do when I leave the military? I don't want to be a supply clerk anymore. So, well, you don't have to be, because there's a lot of different types of jobs out there that utilize inventory controls and stockage. And so one example, and you might think this is funny, but going back to banking as an example, a lot of banks have their retail banking branches, and they have ATMs in those banking branches. Well, how do you know how much money has to go into the ATM so that you can figure out how you're going to serve your customers? Like on a weekend, there might be a high demand for people using the ATM machines over the weekend, so you're going to have to put more money in the ATM than you would maybe on a boring Tuesday afternoon. So you need people who can analyze data and who can determine what stockage levels need to be in the ATM. So if you have a logistics background, that's actually very helpful for those types of jobs, because not everybody can analyze the data and figure that kind of stuff out. So I think, again, it's helpful as you go through the exercise and you look at the skills that you have, start Googling. You know, if I have a background in inventory control, what kind of jobs come up? Some are going to be obvious, like in retail, but some are not going to be obvious, like the ATM example. So you might be really surprised to find out what different types of companies and what different types of jobs need someone who has an inventory control background. And then that might sound more interesting to you than perhaps what you were thinking about doing, or what you felt like you were kind of resigned, oh, I guess I'm going to end up doing this when I leave the military. Maybe that'll give you a little more inspiration as to what you could do.
Lisa,
any other questions?
I'm going to ask you a kind of a question to follow up on all of your answers there. Are you finding through the work that you're doing that more employers are doing their homework? You know, just like we're providing this webinar for job seekers on how can they translate their military experience to potential employers. Are you seeing an increase from employers trying to understand this world so that, you know, if they have that ATM that they need stocked, that they know that a military person can do that job?
We're seeing a lot more of it. So the work that I do at the Value of a Veteran is basically that, educating the employers on how to do some of this work that I've just described. You know, if you look at what are the top, 5 or 10 positions that your company has a routine need to hire at all times, go ahead and make that list, and then do very similar to what I just described for the military people. Start with ONET and say, okay, if I need someone who's a customer service rep, or I need someone who can do that instrument and controls type work, what skills am I looking for, and then how do I determine whether that military or which military occupations also utilize that skill set. So that way I know as I go to job fairs that I should be really excited when I see someone whose resume says infantry or armor, because I know they have a combat arms background, and what I know about that is they've got great operational skills, and they've got great leadership and teamwork skills, and that's exactly what I need for my job. So I'm not sitting there scratching my head going, ugh, what do I do with this infantry resume? That they start to anticipate and they start to look specifically for people with that background. They start to customize some of their job descriptions so that the job description includes some of that language, especially if they're going to post that job description on a military website or job posting website. So they'll say, maybe some ideal candidates for this role have a background in doing investigations, whether it's military police work or intel, or just a little bit of military language in there can go a long way. And so that service member can look at that job description and go, oh, okay, because I didn't necessarily think that I would be a good fit for this role, but you're already telling me you've done some of that research and you know that I am. Okay, I'm interested to learn more. Maybe I'll apply for this job.
Gotcha. Okay. Any other questions from our participants?
Has this been helpful, or are there things that you're still kind of struggling with as you're trying to build out the resumes and figure out what types of jobs might be appropriate for you?
We have had 2 comments come in saying that they've enjoyed the webinar, that the content has been quite useful.
Okay, good. All right. Well, I'm trying to think of what else I might want to ask you all in terms of, again, where you are sort of with the job hunt and things like that. Perhaps we'll start with that. Maybe, what resources are you currently using to get for those of you that are actively looking, what resources are you using to find work? Are you putting putting kind of like a general resume out there in the ether, or are you specifically applying directly to companies from their websites, or basically what tactics are you using? Are you using social media, LinkedIn, Facebook, any of these types of things to find positions? While you're waiting for someone to respond, that's one of the other documents that I provided you, is how to use LinkedIn and Twitter specifically to find positions, to find who's hiring, what they're hiring for, or basically to get yourself out there and get yourself found. Because if you're not on LinkedIn, you're already missing the boat. LinkedIn is not Facebook. Facebook is fun, and what you had for breakfast, and what you're doing this weekend. That's all good for Facebook. LinkedIn is a professional website, and if you're looking for a job, it's where you need to be, because that's where a lot of the recruiters from the companies hang out, and that's where they're looking for talent. That is, part of their overall sourcing strategy for positions. So you need to be on there, and you need to have your profile read in plain English. So you're going to utilize a lot of what we just went through to build out your profile on LinkedIn. Put maybe one or two of those general resumes out there on your profile so that you can be found if someone is looking for someone with your skill set. So take a look at that document, and basically you can kind of follow it step by step, and just build out your profile. Even if you're not actively in the job hunt today, you're still 2 years away from leaving the military. Still, you need to get on there now and start building out that information now, and then continue to add to it as you get closer to the date when you're actually going to be looking for a job.
Some of the comments we've had come in are network, 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 which across all grades of trying to find employment is so critically important. And then another, general resume on job search sites and applying directly to companies' open positions that they have.
Okay. Yeah, I think the networking cannot be overemphasized, and this is, again, something that most people just kind of cringe on. It's like, it sounds like I have to go to some, networking event and hand out business cards, and it just sounds really boring. LinkedIn, again, is a tremendous resource for a lot of these things. So let's say you're still, maybe a couple months out of leaving the military, but you're actively researching roles. And so you've got that great background in investigations and in logistics, and you kept coming across evidence that maybe different banks might be interested in someone with that skill set, but you want more detail. Well, that's how LinkedIn can help you, because you can, let's say join a group. We have a group on LinkedIn called The Value of a Veteran. I provided a link there on the slide. Please join us. You can join our group and post something on there like, hi, I've got a background in investigation and logistics, and I'm getting out in February 2015. And I think that my skills might be very useful in financial services, banking, and insurance, but there might be others. Does anyone have any suggestions for me as to what other industries or what other types of jobs I might look for? And so people will start commenting on that, saying, oh, you should look here, and you should look in this industry, or you should look at these kind of jobs. So number one, now you're gathering intel, right, for your job hunt. So now you're going to get some alternative industries and some alternative employers and alternative jobs. But two, you're going to start making connections with people. So maybe you continue to get that emphasis on financial services and banking. Well, start using LinkedIn. Can you find some military members who work at these different banks who might be willing to talk to you? Because, again, you're a fellow military member. They're going to talk to you if you reach out to them and say, hey, I've got some questions about being that investigative position at the bank. Can I talk to you about that, or would you be willing to introduce me to someone else, veteran or non-veteran, in your organization who does that job specifically, so that I can ask them some more questions about what the job really entails and how I might better describe what it is that I do, and then they can give me some better language that I can put on my resume, and I can keep adding that to my master skills list. So LinkedIn is brilliant for that kind of stuff, because it's really easy to find, who are the veterans who work at Bank of America, who are the veterans who work at Walt Disney. All those kind of things are easy to find if you know how to search. And so that's how that paper that I gave you gives you some clues as to how to do that.
We've had a question come in from Eric, and it reads, any specific tips for military veterans in job interviews for private sector jobs in talking about military experience without overwhelming or confusing the employer? Would you recommend some of the similar advice that you have offered for resumes?
Yes, absolutely. So again, building off of that kind of master skills list, most civilian employers utilize what we call behavioral interviewing, and so they basically want you to tell them a story. And so this sometimes is a bit of a challenge for service members, because we're not used to talking about ourselves. We're always like, the team did this, the team accomplished this mission. It's like, well, guess what? The team is not interviewing for this job. You are, and there's 40 other people also interviewing for it, so you need to talk about you. and what you can do. So then you can balance off of that. It's like, okay, from what I'm, checked and rehearsed, that I get that this person wants me to talk about my problem-solving skills or my investigative skills or whatever the skill set is. They want me to talk about that. So because I've taken the time to create that master skills list and maybe at the same time identify, what's a good example of me utilizing that skill. I remember back when I was deployed to Iraq in 2007 that, this particular situation happened and I really had to, showcase my ability to do X. So keep that on your skills list somewhere. Here's some relevant examples of me utilizing that skill set. And so when it comes time to tell that story to the employer, you've already got it top of mind. Okay, that's a question on my investigative skills, and boom, I've got an example of when I've used it and what the results were. And so pull that out of your back pocket, give them that example, and now you're not fumbling for that information. It's not like, oh my God, I didn't know they were going to ask me about my skills. I have no relevant stories to tell. You already have prepared for that, and you've got those skill sets. And then the question is, can you get the story out in a reasonable amount of time to where you can show that you do have the skills, that you can get results for the work that you do, but you don't have to give every last detail on the situation itself. You don't have to give the back history of Iraq. You don't have to do any of that kind of stuff. Just get to the point. Here was the situation, or the problem. Here's the problem that we faced, and here's ultimately what I had to do to fix that, and just be able to talk about that. And you can answer those kind of questions in just a couple minutes. So have those examples and practice that.
That's great advice. One last call for questions here. We have a couple minutes left. Are there any other questions for Lisa today?
If not, I want to emphasize, please do connect with me on LinkedIn, because that'll certainly connect you to everybody I'm connected to, and I'm connected to a lot of employers. And join our group, because you got to join at least one. You can join up to 50. Join ours.
And certainly want to remind everyone of the Ag Warriors program on agcareers.com. We do allow you, when you post your resume, to designate by checking a box that you are an Ag Warrior, a veteran seeking employment in the agricultural industry. And we are working with employers, educating them on what that denotion on your resume means as well. So I want to, of course, thank Lisa for all of her great, valuable content she has shared today and for presenting today's webinar. And certainly, again, a huge thank you to our sponsor, CHS, for making it possible for us to provide this at no cost to you all as job seekers. So thank you to both of those, both CHS and Lisa, and we hope that you all have a fabulous weekend. Be sure to check your email for the evaluation that you will be receiving, and it will also include the attachments that we mentioned earlier, the slide deck from today, and the 2 additional handouts. You have Lisa's contact information. There you can connect with her via LinkedIn if you have any additional questions for her. And then certainly you have the agcareers.com contact information as well. Thank you again for joining us, and for those of you who are active military or veterans, for your service. And we hope you have a great weekend.
Thanks so much.